You can't answer that. Yeah. It is Portuguese. Portuguese is corrupted Spanish, right? For you Spanish speakers? Spanish is corrupted Portuguese. Yeah, there's an ongoing debate about that, isn't there? How many of you speak Spanish? All right. Few of you. How many of you studied Spanish? Yeah. They do the same thing in Brazil. Everybody has to study English, you know, but it's kind of the same thing. Good morning. That's about it. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. I took the words right out of your mouth. It means, yeah, it means good morning. Yeah. Yeah. And so every once in a while, I'll throw a language up there, you know, and I have some fun with that. Well, Thursday, I do have a quiz for you all, so I will mute this just long enough to take our quiz. Please. Okay, welcome back, online students. Got our quiz. And if you look at things out there, you better study a little extra. Just kidding. All right. Y'all look really nice today. Thank you for the little extras on the board. Thank you. I would erase it, but I think you're old enough that, mature enough that won't, thank you, that won't prove to be a distraction for you, right, our class. So, thank you. Thank you, I like it. You don't even need an umbrella today. Thank you, thank you. All right, thank you very much. Okay. Do I have all the quizzes?
Are you a Jedi?
And they're all 3 by 5, so yes. Thank you very much.
Yes.
Okay. I'll forget what I put them there. Okay, do we baptize the whole tribe? Here's what you all said about that. Clicker. 69 said no. 16, whoops. 16 of you said yes. So those of you who said yes, baptize the whole tribe. What's your rationale? Yeah.
I just say that they are whatever the where they go away. I don't think that is the idea is that they belong to people in that. So there are times where they're no longer people.
Okay, and they're making a collective statement to that effect, and you're good with that. All right, good. Somebody else, why'd you put yes? Baptize the whole tribe. Yeah.
I didn't put yes, but one of the ways you could justify would be like, I think typically when tribes make a decision like that, even the ones that were against it, they end up around as tribe decision.
Okay, all right. It's a tribe decision, and that's just the way they work in that situation. Okay, all right. That's an interesting comment. Anybody else want to, on the yes side? Why baptize everybody? Okay, how about the no's? Yeah. Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay, baptism is an individual decision, and even in a group of Christians who say they're saved, some maybe really are not. Okay, good. Yes, sir? Oh, go ahead. Start with you, then go back there. Yeah, go ahead, Caleb.
I was just going to say that, like, even in our culture, like nowadays, like, people see baptism is saving you. And I think that if you baptize the whole tribe, they might falsely put their salvation or their hope of salvation.
Okay, all right. Easy for them to misunderstand what baptism is and think that's saving them. Yes?
That's something that I was going to say, because they're new Christians, so they see it more as, not even Christians, they see it more as ritualistic. As I said, there was a detail that said there was sort of a disease going around. So they figured their God wasn't helping them, so if they go to this other God that the missionaries have brought for like a week or until the disease passes, then they can go back to their old God or whatever other God they feel like that day. So they're new in faith, so they don't really have a full understanding of what the purpose of baptism is.
Okay.
They just want to do it so that they can get better that time.
Now, if, let's assume that the missionaries had explained very carefully what the role of baptism is, would you change your view? Assume that they understood what baptism signifies?
Yeah.
Right, interesting. All right, yeah.
Well, as a whole, like the chief is deciding for the tribe. It says in the case study that some of them were against it, some of them did not want to God.
Mm-hmm.
So if the chief just says, "Oh, you have to get baptized," they're obviously going to follow his command, but inside their own hearts, they're still going to believe in those with God. They're not going to have like a deep faith for God or deep knowledge. They're just going to observe it. We're doing this.
Okay, so some of the tribe had a manifest opposition, but in the end, chief and the groups that were going to do it, they may have felt strange to it just because they didn't want to disobey the chief. All right? Yep.
I agree that it's like a combination of both of them. Like, salvation is a personal decision. Somebody can't make that decision for you. It literally says in the scripture, you have to make that decision on your own. And like you said, some of them were against it, like fully on against it. So they didn't actually mean what they were saying. And not only that, it was, if they were to, I typed it out because I know myself. I have flags. The fact that was the other point. I had to look at it for a second. The other point was they went directly back to their gods, because it clearly says that they went back to the old gods immediately after making that decision, and they used the excuse, oh well, we're telling them to go away. No, that's just, if you truly believed in the Lord Jesus Christ, then you wouldn't even have any association. You wouldn't be doing all these same rituals you would be. So it could possibly mean that they just said it to make these people happy.
Okay.
So it would stop bothering them.
Okay. We're dealing with motive here. How do we know the intent of the mind, what they're really, why they're doing it?
Well, their heart doesn't show. Like, if they truly believe in Jesus, then they wouldn't even, if they really made that decision, then they wouldn't be doing the same rituals. It's not that they didn't have, it was the wrong motive. It was what they're saying they did is being immediately disproved by what they are currently doing.
Okay. Gotcha. For sake of time, I saw a hand here. Somebody hasn't spoken. I think had a hand here, then one over here, and we're done.
Because they were going to tell their God that we're actually
Mm-hmm.
they don't
Okay. All right, good. What last one?
So I agree, I'm not disagreeing.
That's good. We don't have to throw you out of here.
Just come from backgrounds where different people have different cultures and and the Bible talks very clearly that if you're worshiping idols, you're worshiping. And so I wouldn't say that by them going over and seeing rid of our gods that they're necessarily going against what they said they are. Because according to their culture, technically they were worshiping them. And so I don't think we can necessarily make that clear. And what they've been doing for previous. Does that make sense?
Yep, makes sense. Absolutely. All right, this is an interesting discussion. Let me just make a couple of thoughts. As in the other discussions and the other case studies, we don't have all of the pieces of the puzzle, all the information we'd like to have in order to make a judgment. I would say this, you're dealing here with a collectivistic society which represents about 2/3 of the world's population. Decisions are typically made in concert, in groups, whether it's a family, whether it's a tribe, okay, that is common. And our immediate reaction to that is, no, you need to go around to each and every one of those and ask, have you trusted Christ? Are you trusting in Christ? Because some of them may be following for the wrong reason. Some of them might, okay? But generally speaking, in those situations, the group makes a decision together and they agree to that decision, and it becomes decision of their hearts. It was mentioned that there were some who were opposed. Did they change their minds? Exactly what happened there, I don't know. There are 4 cases in the book of Acts where families come to Christ together. First one is the first one is in chapter 10, Cornelius and his family. When the Spirit falls, Peter is preaching there. Entire group comes to Christ at once. Then you have Lydia and her family come to Christ, the Philippian jailer, when that earthquake happens. The entire family is believing together. Then you have Crispus, the synagogue ruler, who's booted out because he trusts Christ and his whole family as well. I don't think in those cases Paul went around to each individual one and said, "Now wait a minute, we've got to interview each one to make sure that each one is truly trusting Christ." We were dealing with a different kind of culture, not dealing with the same individualism that we know here in our country. Is there a risk that some of those are not truly trusting Christ? Yes, there is. Is there a risk that in an individualistic society, somebody that says, "I want to trust Christ," is ingenuine? Of course there is. There is no guarantee in any kind of culture, under any circumstances, that this is not going to happen. So as a principle, I would tell you, if I were ministering in a collectivistic society, in a tribal area, the tribe said, "We are ready to follow Christ," I would baptize the tribe, assuming that I had made very clear the gospel, explained baptism, what it means. If they go back to their gods, as was mentioned, I think rightly so, even though there's only one true God, there are demons involved in idol worship. The New Testament makes that clear. And when they go back and they tell their gods, "We're done with you," okay, I do not think that that's a sign that somehow they've not trusted Christ. They don't understand. Look, there's a lot they don't understand. When people come to Christ, they bring baggage with them. We can't make them Bible college graduates before we baptize them. All right? The question is, have they repented and trusted Christ? The fact that they went back to tell their gods, "We're done with you," is an indication that they have repented. They've changed their minds. In a culture like that, you wouldn't go back to those gods and say that unless you were really convinced of the truth, because those gods do a lot of damage in your life if you did that to them. They can pronounce curses on you. They can make you sick. I mean, and this is real. So for them to go back and say, "We are done with you," is a pretty powerful statement of conviction coming from them. So it's something for you to think about. Again, we do have to be careful in any culture under any circumstances. But I would tend in this case, not knowing more of the details of the story, I would tend to side more with the minority here, with perhaps some reservations, some conditions that I would employ in order to try to minimize false decisions for Christ. It's very different, and it's a fascinating study, but give it some more thought. We got to move on. Okay, these are all really cool. I love case studies. I would love to do a class where we do nothing but case studies. I do current issues of missiology. We would practically do case studies in that class. But let's move back to missions history. All right, thank you for your comments. Missions history. We started with foundation of the church and moved up to about 1500. Now we're at about the Reformation period, and we're going to take this all the way to 1900. So we're going to cover a period of about 400 years here. One thing you should understand is that in the year 1800, okay, we actually encounter what is called the modern missions era. And so that's not obvious here in our delineation, but 1800 is about the time of William Carey, and certain things happened at that time which cause historians to say, okay, this is the beginning of the modern missions movement. He started the idea of mission societies, okay, and we'll talk more about that when we get there. But let's start with the Reformation. Again, these are just a few select. I don't expect anybody to recognize this guy, but somebody might. Oh, wait a minute. Is his name in your notes? Oh, good. All right. Give you a hint. He was an early worker among the Native Americans here in our country. Yes. No, but we're going to talk about David. Yeah, you're right. David didn't have hair quite like that, but that's a good guess because David did work among them. Yeah. No, Wycliffe was another guy.
I know who he had this conference in my history.
Oh, you did? Okay, all right. No, not Whitfield. Yeah.
Whitman?
No, that's coming up too. Yeah.
Is it a white man?
Yeah, he is. I'll give you that much. Okay, he's got the same name as a famous, John Elliott, right. John Elliott is the name. And just remember that his name has one L in it, and Jim Elliott, who worked with the natives in Ecuador, has two L's. And the easiest way to remember that is the one L came first, and the two L's came later on, okay? John Elliott, one L, Jim Elliott, two L's, okay? And we'll talk about Jim and his comrades as well. John Elliott, anybody else ever hear of this guy? I really, really like his story. It's a refreshing story. He was born in 1604 and lived in 1690, so he lived to the ripe old age of 86, which for that period of time is pretty old. He was from England. Remember, we're still largely looking at missionaries from England among the colonists, although not everybody was. His place of service was the Eastern United States. He had actually been a part of the Anglican Church in England. And I don't know how much you've studied the Anglican Church. It was pretty Catholic in a lot of its thinking. And he was kind of a dissenter. He didn't agree with a lot that was going on, so he was kind of blackballed. And he eventually left and came to the United States with some of his cousins, and his fiance joined him later on. And they took a pastorate in Massachusetts, and really for quite a while had very little contact with the Native Americans. It wasn't until he was about 40 years old that God touched his heart for the Native Americans, the Algonquin Indian tribe there, and he began to minister among them. And that's really what he's known for today, even though originally he had started out as a pastor working among the colonists in that area. So Native Americans, a lot of people have asked, what do you call Native Americans? And I have actually spoken to Native Americans asking this question. This political correctness kind of leaves us nervous sometimes. What do you call them? Some of you are aware that a few years back, some wanted to sue the Washington Redskins and force them to change the name of their team. My understanding is that whole push did not come from Native Americans, but from white people who were trying to make a case for something. There may have been some Native Americans who were on board with that too. But the primary emphasis of that was coming from white people. So anyway, Native Americans would be the best term. I grew up calling them Indians. And you all know why they were called Indians, right? Because Christopher Columbus thought he had reached the West Indies, and so they gave him that title. It was never meant to be a slam or anything like that. Now, there were derogatory terms used, like savages, okay? Things like that were definitely, definitely out of order. But you'll still hear me using the word Indian just because that's what I've grown up with. And I'm from Ohio, where the Cleveland Indians play baseball too, although I really wasn't an Indians fan. I was an Orioles fan, Baltimore. Go figure. I've never been to Baltimore in my life. My dad was an Orioles fan, so I followed him. All right, his weakness. Now, I call this a weakness, but I want to qualify that. John Elliott was a colonialist, and colonialism is that idea that we need to transform the culture and society of these pagans in order for the gospel to be able to take root. So there was this idea that you cannot plant the gospel of Jesus Christ in a pagan culture. You must change the culture first. Well, biblically, that's working backwards, because the Bible doesn't tell us to change the culture to make it suitable, fertile for the gospel. The Bible tells us to penetrate cultures with the gospel of Jesus Christ and allow the impact of the gospel to affect the culture. See the difference? The colonists were getting the cart before the horse. And again, I'm not criticizing John Elliott, because this was the mentality of virtually everybody who was involved in missionary work at that time. Very, very few people resisted this idea. Does that make sense? And some have asked, does colonialism still happen today? Yes, it does. It may not be as blatant and as obvious, but to some degree there is still among many an attitude of Western superiority. That somehow, we're farther along, we got a better understanding of things, how they work, we're economically superior, and blah, 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 blah. So, it's very, very difficult for Westerners to penetrate the two-thirds world and, without at least the temptation of taking that tendency with them in their hearts. So we still have to be careful about that. Obviously, God has used our country greatly as a missionary sending nation, but that does not make us superior to other cultures. But colonialism is a fascinating study. Many missionaries were falsely accused of being colonialists simply because they took advantage of the transportation and other things that were available to them because of the colonialists, right? So, they would go on their ships, they would follow the paths that the colonialists had established. And because of that, they were often associated with a wrong attitude. Any of you studied King Philip's War? Okay, King Philip, in summary, King Philip lived in the Northeast United States, and the Indians, Native Americans, have been putting up for years with the encroachment of the white man. They called this land grabbing, where little by little the settlers were taking over the lands that had belonged to the Native Americans. And you need to understand, too, that for many Native Americans, the land wasn't just land. It was sacred. It belonged not only to their tribe and their people, but to their ancestors, whom they believed were still living and wandering around. And you take their land and you take the wandering place of their ancestors. So this goes a lot deeper than just the issue of real estate. Okay? This is very, very important. And this is happening. Many of the Indians tolerated it. Many of them tried to cooperate. Many times there were promises that we would only go so far or whatever. But there came a boiling point, and finally this whole thing erupted. And it was a very, very sad thing. John Eliot believed that he needed to get believers, new Christians, out of their settlements and into what he called prayer towns. He established like 14 prayer towns. We talked about this in my history class the other day. In some cases, that was necessary because in some tribes, you could not remain within if you had changed gods. A follower of Christ, you would either be killed or booted out. So in some cases, it was necessary to physically leave the tribe and establish yourself somewhere else. In other places, not so much. So he established these praying towns, but during King Philip's War, it was the bloodiest colonial war in history. Many, 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 many Native Americans died. Some missionaries did as well. And the work among the Native Americans with the gospel did take a huge hit, a big setback because of this. So very, very sad story. John Eliot himself became really discouraged near the end of his life, but he said, as long as God gives me two legs, I will continue to serve him, walk, preach the gospel. Had a wonderful attitude. He definitely was opposed to the land grabbing and those things that were happening. And he died at a ripe old age, faithful servant of the Lord. I really like the story of John Eliot, and I encourage you to do some extra reading. If you're looking for something to read today, we'll give you some more ideas of things that you can study. All right, that is John Eliot among the Native Americans in North. Oh, one thing I forgot to mention about him, he translated the first Bible, okay, in a Native American language, some say in the Western Hemisphere, but at least in the New World, in what is now the United States. And it was translated in 16, help me out with that, that's 1663, okay, those Roman numerals. And it took him about 14 years to do that. He started off by actually translating some catechisms for the natives to learn about the scriptures, some teachings, lessons, and then he started the New Testament, the Old, and about 14 years he had it all finished up. By the way, 14 years to translate the entire scriptures, pretty fast. Today, they say that the average for Old and New Testament, depending on the language, is about 20 years. About 5 years for a New Testament, 15 or even more sometimes for the Old Testament. So he was a graduate of Cambridge, brilliant man, did a great job with that. Bible translation has been around just about as long as the church has, as long as the scriptures have. New Testament, it's an amazing thing. Remember, in the Old Testament, Israel was central in God's plan, and therefore Hebrew scriptures, rule the day. But in the church, where there's no central nation, the gospel is going to the ends of the earth, that the gospel is translated into hundreds of thousands of languages. And that continues to be done today. Anybody here have an interest in the possibility of something like Bible translation ministry? Okay, you do? Anybody else? That just sounds like a really neat opportunity for you. We're not taking commitments here, but I love this. I really would like to see us as a school be able to get more contact with Bibles International or groups like that could come out here and perhaps even do a module sometime for those interested. It's time. When are you going to do that during spring break? You're going to give up your spring break to do a module? You know, all that has to be considered. But anyway, it's a really, really important ministry. Okay, that is John Elliott. I don't expect you probably to recognize this guy either. Somebody might. His hair looks a little similar to John's. Central Europe, yeah.
Nicholas.
All right, it's in your notes.
No.
No?
I looked it up.
You looked it up. You cheater. All right. Hey, good for you. I'm really glad you did that. That's showing some initiative. Count Nicholas Ludwig von Zinzendorf. Man, can you imagine when the teacher's taking attendance, you know? They probably call him Zinni for sure, right? No, I don't think they did. Now this guy, what's a count? Is that somebody who knows math? Yeah. Okay, it's a noble position. This guy had an estate. Okay, he came from a very noble family, wealthy family. He had money. We could say he was rich. And God got a hold of his heart. It's a neat story. Again, we're just giving you the tip tops of these, all right? He was born in 1700 and lived to 1760. And has anybody studied Zinzendorf before? Yeah. All right, do you happen to remember what movement he's associated with that really made an impact on the way we do missions even today? Group missionary movement started in what is today the Czech Republic.
It's in our notes.
Well, that's in your notes.
The Lord's Watch.
Well, okay, yeah, kind of. Yeah, hang on a second. All right. He was German, and there's the area where he ministered. You're right, it did involve the Lord's Watch there. I'm going to open up to your notes here. I might as well figure out where you are and what you're doing here. Okay. This is the area of the modern day Czech Republic. Remember, Czechoslovakia was divided up into Czech Republic and Slovakia. And this is where he served. All right, here, I'll give it away. His country of service was Moravia. You had it, yeah. Have you heard of the Moravians before? Okay. Very, very, very important as a contribution to the way we do missions today. They did a lot of things really well. One of the hallmarks of the Moravians is that they believed that everybody was a missionary. And some of you would say, well, isn't that the case? Aren't we all missionaries? Yes and no. I want to be careful when I make a statement like that. Everybody's a missionary. Yes, we all are participants in the Great Commission. Okay, I think we would all agree with that. We're all involved in the Matthew 28, 19, 20 mission. But to say that everybody is a missionary who's a Christian is almost like saying nobody is a missionary. In other words, there is a distinction in the way God uses people under the banner of the Great Commission. And so when we talk about vocational missions or career missions, we're talking about a specialized way of fulfilling the Great Commission. We refer to as missions. We're going to have a missions conference here, Lord willing, at the end of October, last 4 days of October. So we're going to be talking about missionaries. We're going to be, displayers are going to be coming who are career missionaries, vocational missionaries, we call them that, right? Obviously, we don't believe that everybody is doing that. So we do make a distinction between certain types of ministry under the umbrella of the Great Commission. But the Moravians, they wouldn't have supported things like a mission agency or, God calling certain people to be, missionaries in other countries, cross-culturally or at home or whatever. They just believed that everybody was. But that was a very, very good contribution because it did emphasize that everybody should be involved. Whether you're on the field somewhere, or whether you're home praying and supporting, all of us should have some involvement. So, if you ask the question, why do I have to take a class in Intro to Missions and Evangelism? Because I'm not going to be a missionary. You are going to have some connection with missions no matter what you do, because we're all interwoven. There's a network, a kaleidoscope of responsibilities within the Great Commission. And so I just want to make that point. The Moravians were also responding against a tendency that was arising in the church. Remember we said that because of the Reformation and the Enlightenment and the publication of the first Greek New Testament, education was becoming more and more popular, more and more encouraged. Not just the clergy, but common people can study. So education really started taking off. That had an impact on the church. What happened was the church, to some degree, actually started becoming so academic that people were losing their zeal, their mission focus, and it was all about, theology and learning and degrees and all that kind of stuff. And obviously nothing is wrong with that stuff or else we wouldn't be here. But the pendulum tends to swing in history. Anytime you study history, you see the pendulum swinging. Very difficult to get it to stop right here in the middle where it belongs. Pendulums are always moving. And so the pendulum was moving, and there was a group of Germans who really were concerned about coolness among many of the churches and the lack of zeal. And they started to push against this. Does anybody remember what they were called? Name of the group. What do you call someone that's very godly? We call him a very godly person. He is a what? Yeah, we don't use it. We almost use it in a derogatory fashion. He or she is really pious, right? You've heard that? Well, pious comes from the word godly. Have you heard of the German pietists? German pietism was the movement that reacted against this academic influence. And Frank Spener, a couple of guys that headed this up. Zinzendorf actually became one of their students at the University of Halle, Halle. It was established in that part of the world. And they tried to help bring the pendulum back toward a middle position. And they did a great work. The Moravians really championed that whole idea. Later on, Moravians became almost mystical. And so they so reacted against the academic emphasis that they swung the pendulum too far, and they started making these weird allegations like, we're just little worms sucking the blood of Jesus at the cross, and crazy things like that. Now that's not Zinzendorf. That's later on, okay, years after when the thing started to really go sour. Okay, so I don't say that to color that's not the Moravians as a movement. That's the latter stages of the movement. And, we always have to be careful about trying to maintain a balance. Charles Ryrie wrote a book called Balancing Christian Life. Anybody have that book? I love the title because there's so much to that. Avoiding extremes and having a balance. Academics are important, but so is the heart, so is the zeal for God. All right, there's Herrnhut with the Lord's Watch. That was his estate. He had this huge estate, and he invited people who were being persecuted in other places for the cause of Christ to find refuge there. It actually became a refuge. And so all these refugees were coming and being welcomed there in his estate, and many of them came to Christ through his ministry. So he used his wealth and his means to help people come to a knowledge of Christ. Just a wonderful ministry that he had there among them. And again, there's the missions philosophy. Everyone a missionary, true in principle, but again, be careful that you don't over-apply it, take it to an extreme, and eliminate the whole distinction of people serving in a more vocational career fashion. Okay, if you have questions about these guys, move along. feel free, or maybe you've read something, say, hey, I read this about this guy. Feel free to speak up and share your thoughts. Okay, who's this guy? You said it and you got it. Who is he? David Brainerd, right? How many of you have read something about David Brainerd? Yeah, several of you have. This guy's an enigma. It's a very, very interesting situation. Do you know how long he was a missionary? You can give it to me on one hand. 5 years. And yet, today, he is one of the most powerful examples of missions and devotion to God you'll find anywhere in the history of missions. How's that happen in 5 years? Let's talk a little bit about this. This is a statement that he made. He kept a very, very detailed journal. And in that he said, I care not where I go or how I live or what I endure so that I may save souls. When I sleep, I dream of them. When I awake, they are first in my thoughts. And his journals are just full of stuff like that. His longing to know God, his desire to have an intimate relationship with God. David Brainerd, that's the man. He was born in 1718. So Zinzendorf was 1700. He was 1718. But notice the length of his life. How old was he when he died? 29 years old. 5-year ministry. Yeah. He was born in Connecticut. I'm just kidding, Connecticut. Who are our Northeasterners here? Who's from the Northeastern United States? Buddy?
Michigan.
Michigan? I'm a Buckeye from Ohio. Yeah. Started talking about Buckeyes in chapel yesterday. I started getting my feathers ruffled. Or was that the day before? Yeah, I was about ready to stand up and defend my state. No Northeasterners here in our class? You are. Where are you from? All right, New York. Who else? We got Pennsylvania. Dr. Don Long is from Pennsylvania. Some of you remember him. He just retired. Okay. He served in the Eastern United States. Wasn't called that then. It was the United States. In fact, Michigan and Ohio were part of the Northwest Territory. Imagine that. And he ministered among Native Americans. Now, there's a story behind him, quite a long story. He went to college at Yale, one of the Ivy League schools. Very brilliant guy. And while he was at Yale, something tragic happened. Does anybody remember what happened? An incident in the classroom that ended up marking his life? Yale was suffering from the same thing we talked about earlier, the academic nature, the coolness of spiritual zeal and all of that. And there were some students that were trying to resolve that and to fire up their colleagues and to get the Spirit of God back in the school, so to speak. And he was one of them. But he made a disrespectful statement to a professor in the classroom. And listen, ladies and gentlemen, it just I'm very easygoing. So if you want to say something to me, constructive criticism, I'm very open to that. But he said in the classroom that the professor, excuse me, had about as much grace as a chair. Now that may not sound very meaningful to you. But that was a statement back then that basically said he's a deadbeat. He was basically calling his professor a deadbeat. You guys still use that term today, deadbeat? Okay, give me what you use. Somebody that's just absolutely a zero, boring. Huh? What? Right. Okay, couch potato. Is that what you're going to say? Oh.
I'm going to say goof.
Goof, all right. Yeah. It's a bum. Yes. And so obviously he was called on the carpet by the faculty, and they demanded that he apologize publicly for having said that, which he refused to do. It was stubborn. Right? Any stubborn people in the room here? Thank you for being honest. So as a result of his stubbornness, his refusal to apologize, He was kicked out of school. Didn't graduate from Yale. And later on, as the story goes, he kind of resented that, or he repented of that, and he actually went back to the school asking for permission to be reinstated, which they denied. Didn't let him back. So he ends up getting connected with a missionary couple working among the Native Americans, and he spends some time with them. But he was stubborn. So they encouraged him, stay with us for a few years, learn from us, and then, after you get your feet on the ground, you can go out. But he would have nothing to do with that. He was ready to go out and win the Native Americans for Christ, and stay with this couple would be wasting precious time, that we can use for reaching Christ. They went out on his own. Now, as a result, he faced some struggles that he may have avoided had he spent some time learning from this couple, which I would very, 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 very forcefully encourage you to do if you have an opportunity early in your ministry to work under somebody in a mentorship capacity for a few years. You might be amazed at what you learn and some of the things that you would avoid by having done so. So off he goes on his own, and he really struggles. He's alone in the woods, and trying to reach these, and there are ups and downs. In some cases, he is just absolutely angry with the Native Americans, and he calls them names, and calls them stupid, and then at other times, he moved to New Jersey and worked in that area for a while, and God gave him some fruit, and during this time, he's really struggling with himself. He's feeling he struggled with depression profusely. Now, John Piper wrote a book a few years ago called, now I'm going to forget the name of the book. I'll have to get the name of the book. It's about 3 servants of God, great servants of God, well known today, who all suffered from depression. And David Brainerd was one of those. When I think of it, I'll tell you, I read it and I was greatly encouraged by it. And he really wrestled with that. There were times he just felt like God was done with him, God was going to squash him, and he'd be out of it. And other times, he really shows great depth of character, his desire to know God, know Christ. So, as I said earlier, it's kind of an enigma. He's an interesting individual. He did contract probably something like tuberculosis. I don't know if they've ever really substantiated that's what it was, but the symptoms seem to indicate TB. I have an uncle that died of tuberculosis back when he was 21 in 1938. Never met the guy. During this period of time, he meets a young lady named Jerusha Edwards, whose dad is very famous, especially among theologians, and his name is Jonathan Edwards. You've all heard of Jonathan Edwards, right? And his great sermon, Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. And he proposed to her and married her, but he basically died in her arms. She was nursing him in the last days of his life. He passed away at the age of 29 before they could get married. And she died the following, a year later on Valentine's Day, perhaps having contracted this from him, from having taken care of him. That's not totally substantiated either, but possibility. So why is he so famous if he lived such a short time and had such a struggle in his ministry, not an abundance of fruit to write about? Because he kept a diary, a very, very meticulous diary, and after he passed away, his future to-be father-in-law, Jonathan Edwards, determined to publish his journal. That's what he did. He financed the publication of David Brainerd's journal. We have that today available to us. Anybody purchase that? You can get it. You can get it as an e-copy for Song and a Dance. It's not expensive at all, and might be some good reading. Caleb? No, that's not the one, but that's probably a similar one. Check out John Piper, and then maybe name David Brainerd. The Hidden Smile of God. I knew it would come. The Hidden Smile of God. is the title of the book. I recommend it, especially if you're a person that has wrestled with discouragement, depression, wondering, am I really going anywhere? Is God really doing anything? I think you'll find it very, very encouraging. Okay, the hidden smile of God. So he had this ongoing struggle with depression and his untimely death, perhaps tuberculosis at the age of 29. David Brainerd. All right, we gotta move on. Catch all that? Okay, now I know some of you are gonna recognize this gentleman. Who is this?
Well, he looks like a Muppet.
Looks like a Muppet. No, oh, it kind of does. I love that it's very good artwork. He's known as the father of modern missions. William Carey. Yes, William Carey. All right. What a story. Spend the rest of our time this morning just talking about this guy. 1761. So he was born a year after David Brainerd died, right? There's a 50. Well, let's see. Not quite. No. 1830. Let's see. David Brainerd. I'll forget that. 1761 to 1834. He's from England. He served in India. Brother Joshua, his name's all over the place in India. Right? William Carey. And why is he called the father of modern missions? There are some mission scholars who would take issue with that. I think that he's called the father of modern missions for a couple of reasons. Number one, he did develop the idea of mission societies, or at least popularized it. He founded the Baptist Missionary Society. Later on, many others sprouted. London Missionary Society and on. They were called societies back then. Now we refer to them as mission agencies. Some have called them mission boards. The reason they use the word society is because society is a word that does not suggest authority. I have a little trouble with the idea of a mission board because board signifies ownership. And the purpose of these societies was not to take ownership of the missionaries, but to facilitate the churches in getting them to the field. The church was God's instrument of authority on earth. Okay? And the agency or the society existed to help the churches get people to the field. That's the role of mission agency. If you're going to be a missionary and serve with an agency, I encourage you to find an agency, not only that agrees doctrinally, obviously, but philosophically believes that the local church is in the driver's seat. And they are there as a facilitator, a channel, a helper coming alongside the church. Okay? One of the problems today is that many local churches have pretty much just yielded control of the missionaries to the agency, saying, well, they're the ones that are the experts in missions, they're the ones that have all the research and everything, so who are we to say anything about what our missionaries do? That is a wrong concept. You guys are going to be pastors and leaders in your churches someday. Don't let that happen. You have the responsibility and the tools to be in charge under God for what your missionaries are doing. The agency is there to assist. Okay, so what about him? Well, this is really not doing him justice at all. He did evangelism, he did Bible translation, he was a botanist. He loved gardening, and before he ever even thought of missions, he was involved in that. And eventually on the field, he used botany as a way of supporting and of teaching and of interacting with the nationals there. He translated the Word of God into many, many tribal languages, local languages. I don't remember how many, but he worked on Hindi translation of the scriptures. And at one point, when he was in the middle of translating the scriptures and translating some Bible dictionaries, the barn where he was storing his things caught fire and it was all burned to the ground. What's he do? Back, picks up where he left off, starts over literally, and begins the process again. He is known in history as a plodder. Who are the plotters in the room? You're kind of like the Energizer Bunny. You're not necessarily moving at 95 miles an hour, but you're the kind of person that just tends to just keep on plotting. Who are you guys here? Okay, it depends on what you're plotting about, right? What's going on? That's the way he was. He would not be dissuaded in his word. But he was a vessel of clay, just like you and I. And he struggled with family issues, primarily with his wife. There's a whole book written about Dorothy Carey. Dorothy Carey had an incredible struggle with the whole idea of missions. She went following her husband's desires, but she never really succeeded in adjusting to a cross-cultural life. And there were things going on with her even before they left. She just really had a hard time with missionary life. There are differing views on what caused that and how much of that was really her fault and how much of it was because of something else. And I don't have the corner on that market, and I'm not going to try to make a general statement, but she really had a hard time. And there were times when she would actually be yelling at him, in public, and one time even accusing him of having an affair, which he did not, but she was just really out there sometimes and struggled. Only the Lord knows for sure what all was going on. Let me just say this: if you meet somebody that has that type of tendency in the ministry that struggles, be very careful about drawing quick conclusions, about judging. Just be very patient. Carey's colleagues in the field, he had 3 guys that he worked with closely, and they were all very understanding and very patient, very helpful in the situation. She finally passed away, and he also struggled with his children. He was in some ways an absentee dad. In all of his work, translating and starting churches and working with his botany and traveling, his kids many times suffered from the loss or from the absence of a dad. In fact, one of his colleagues actually kind of picked up the slack and became kind of a father to these kids. And one of them actually ended up becoming a missionary, probably thanks more to William Carey's colleague than to the father himself. So I'm just saying, here's one of the guys, if you were to ask people today, you could exalt one missionary in history that you would say, this guy, if I had to choose one, I would choose him. William Carey would be the choice of many. But he was a real man, real struggles, issues. And I'm just telling you that God uses us. When Jesus said, I will build my church, that's what he meant. He uses us. And I believe that the Church of Jesus Christ is right on schedule today. Humanly speaking, that is a total impossibility. You look at how much we wrestle and struggle with how we do church and missions and all that. Say, man, we are so far behind. No, we're not. Jesus is the master contractor, general contractor. He is right on schedule somehow, despite the fact that he uses people like you and me. Yes, sir. A plotter is somebody that just keeps on going, Again, that might be a term that some of you aren't familiar with. He just keeps on moving, and no matter what, there's a hole there, he steps around, there's a mountain, he climbs over it, just plods along, okay? That's the idea. Kind of like a tank, it just knocks down the trees, just keeps moving along. So I say this to you to encourage you, because some of you might feel like, you knew my life, you knew some things I struggled with, you would ask, why am I here? And the answer is, you're here because God has chosen in his grace and mercy to use you. Why am I here? God could have dragged me out of ministry a long time ago for any number of reasons. Times when I was in a rotten attitude, times when I was discouraged, times when I didn't see any fruit. And yet, for some reason, God has chosen to keep me in ministry. That's the story of virtually anybody who gives his life to serve God. William Carey, amazing man. Who's this? He also went initially to India, but then he ended up going from there to Burma instead and did his ministry. Yeah.
And
Adoniram Judson. We did a play here a few years ago about Adoniram Judson. By the way, who are the actors here? We have some actors? Okay, yeah, I encourage you to get involved. We're going to have a play again next next spring, Lord willing. I'm a movie star here, not movie star. I'm a theatrical actor here now. 2 years ago, I had one line in the play, and then last year they gave me two. So, but they didn't double my salary. I was a little bit ticked off about that. But Adoniram Judson, I'm just kidding. 1788, 1850. This is 27 years after Carey. But he did have contact with Carey. He was an American. He is reputed to be the first American international missionary. Okay, most of these guys were from England, you know. He was born and reared right here in America. And he served in Burma. He did intend to go to India. In fact, he landed there. And it's quite a story. Yeah, I'm going to get bogged down here again. We'll have to end up chopping out more class content, but my heart's full and I want to share this with you guys. This guy was a member of the Congregational Church, Church that Jonathan Edwards was a part of. And they did support the idea of infant baptism, as many churches do today. So he's on the boat heading to Burma, his wife, and with some other missionaries. And they're studying the scriptures along the way, and he's beginning to realize, wait a minute, this thing about baptismal regeneration or, baptism of infants just isn't biblical. What are we going to do? And he actually decides that the Baptist way of thinking and ministering and Baptist doctrine is really where it's at. And his wife, anybody remember his wife's name?
Anna?
Yeah, Anne Hasseltine, yeah. And she says, well, you want to change, convert to be a Baptist? Go ahead, I'm not. Well, these are long boat rides, back in months. And they keep studying together, and finally she comes around and says, you're right. I'm in with you. So they land in India, supported. He got their support by the Congregational Church, right? But now they become Baptists. Oops. What's going to happen to their support? And they end up, serving as Baptist missionaries. It's a long story, but they do get support, and they're able to continue their ministry. But they don't stay in India. They end up going to Burma. Excuse me, to serve there. And of course, Burma today is more known as, Myanmar, however you want to say it, one more indigenous name, exactly. And we have some students here who are associated with this part of the world. Really neat. And God did a work through him there. He did evangelism and translation. Now, talk about depression. Here's another guy that struggled with it. He was in prison because there was a war going on between Burma and England. And the Burmese thought he was an English spy, even though he was an American. But, to them, they all look the same. And most of us, like him, I'm from England. I could easily be labeled an Englishman. And so he was put in prison with a medical doctor, and they thought they were going to die. They actually did a march that they thought was a death march. And just a lot of things happened. Eventually, he was released. But shortly thereafter, his wife died. He actually ended up marrying 3 times during his life, one wife at a time, I suppose. And all 3 of them were faithful servants of the Lord. It's a totally different reality than what William Carey faced. But during this time after his wife died, he got so depressed that he went out into the woods one day, took a shovel, dug a hole, which would become his grave in his own mind. And he just sat there, stood by the hole, just waiting to die, and end it all. After a couple of weeks, meditation and prayer, he eventually kind of came through that and left, and he was restored, overcame his depression, and continued to have a very fruitful ministry for the Lord. I'm just telling you, this guy struggled. You look at guys like this day and say, how could a guy that's so popular, so well known, whose name was upheld as a missionary hero, how could he go through something like that? Well, because we look at the past through rose-colored glasses. Oh, the good old days. My grandmother said once, they can have the good old days. He said, I remember going out to the outhouse in the backyard. We had no electricity. They can have them. I'll stay in the modern world. He died at 95. Yeah. And, you know, these guys were real people. I'm just telling you, if there's one thing we should learn from studying missions history, is that we're all made out of the same fabric. Okay? We're lost sinners saved by grace, and we're in the process. I like to tell my students that we are in the ing mode and not the ed mode. We are ing, we are growing, we are being conformed to the image of Christ. The ed is the past. Okay, the past, we were justified by faith. We have a position that was sealed when we came to Christ. That's past, it's done. But the growing part keeps on going until we get to heaven. All in that process, and we'll be there until we're done. Don't you dare think that because I'm 59 years old, that somehow I've already overcome all of those obstacles, and now, you know, I'm just kind of, woo, on a new high. The older I get, the more I realize how much growing I still have to do. As long as we're in this life, that's the way it's going to be. He really, really wrestled with that at a rough time. But God sustained him nonetheless, and he would tell you if you could talk to him today, pure grace, mercy, God. Nothing. Nothing. Dead now. I don't know if we'll get through this guy or not, John Williams. Now we're in a different part of the world, Pacific, the islands, totally different mission field, vastly different. Temptations in the Pacific Islands were temptations of immorality, loose living, things like that. Considered the paradise of the world. He went from 1796 to 1839. His life was fairly short as well because he was speared and eaten by natives at the end of his life. Some of you studied John Williams. This is not the composer, by the way. Okay, so don't get the two mixed up. Born in England, served in Polynesia, and there's Polynesia. You can see Polynesia, Micronesia, Melanesia. They're all groups of islands in the South Pacific, off the coast of Australia, Papua New Guinea, New Zealand. Anybody been to that part of the world before? Been down there? Okay. My son and his wife did their honeymoon on Fiji many moons ago. He had no formal Bible training. You know, some of these guys were, you know, really sharp and had degrees, but not him. He had a hastily planned marriage because he was going to the field, and so they basically got married, jumped in the boat, and off they went. What about the honeymoon? What honeymoon? And his method was to change the civilization, which we talked about beginning of class, not a good idea. But to his credit, he wanted to involve the nationals. He did not have this idea that the nationals aren't smart enough and talented enough to carry on the work. So they can do it. They're very intelligent. We were the ones that have to change our minds about this, not them. So he got them involved. And I would say to you, whatever ministry you get involved in, whether it's domestic or cross-cultural, get the people who live there involved in the ministry as soon as you. Because the transition later on will be a whole lot easier. And yes, after a furlough, he went back and he went to an island that he was warned about. Savages, you know, and people are going to. And for some reason, and when they were approaching the island, he noticed that only men came out to the shore. Normally, men, women, and children all came out together. So something should have sent up a red flag when that happened. These are only men. Got out of the boat, you know, and immediately was met by warriors wanting to kill him. They jumped in the water, tried to swim back. They overtook them and killed them. And he was eaten by cannibals. People have wondered, why did he do that? One author suggests that because he had been so successful before that he didn't understand his own vulnerability, thought he was invincible. I think that may be a overstatement, false judgment. But nevertheless, he did a great work for the Lord, for which we thank God. All right, enough's enough. We'll see you on Tuesday of next week.